Introduction: the hidden cost of reacting. Most people believe that standing up for yourself means fighting back immediately, that real strength is shown
through quick retaliation, and that letting someone disrespect you without an instant response makes you
weak. This belief
has destroyed more careers, ruined more marriages, and shattered more dreams than any external enemy ever could. The uncomfortable truth is that your need to react instantly to every provocation
isn't making you look strong. It's advertising to the world that you have no control over yourself, while you're busy proving how tough you are through emotional outbursts. Truly powerful people are quietly achieving their goals because they've mastered the one skill that separates winners from losers: the ability to choose their response instead of being controlled by their reaction. Marcus Williams sat in the leather chair across from his boss, watching 5 years of hard work crumble in 30 seconds. The $1 million contract he had spent 18 months negotiating was gone. Not because of market conditions, not because of competition, not because of price. It was gone because of one moment when
he couldn't control what came out of his mouth. The client had made a snide comment about Marcus's presentation
style, calling it amateur hour. Instead of pausing, instead of breathing, instead of choosing his words carefully, Marcus fired back with equal venom. The room went silent. The handshake stopped. The deal died right there on that conference table. As Marcus drove home that evening, his career in ruins, he asked himself the question that would change everything. How did I give one comment so much power over my entire future? That question contains the key to a power that most people never discover. It's not the power to control what happens to you. That's impossible. It's the power to control what happens in you. How one reaction destroyed $1 million deal. It's the power of not reacting. You see, there's a fundamental difference between reacting and responding. When you react, you're giving control of your life to whatever or whoever triggered you. When you respond, you maintain control. You stay in the driver's seat of your own existence. Most people live their entire lives as prisoners to their reactions. Someone says something they don't like, they react. Traffic moves too slowly, they react. Their spouse doesn't do what they expect, they react. Their children don't obey immediately, they react. Their boss criticizes their work, they react. But here's what I want you to understand. Every time you react instead of respond, you're announcing to the world that external circumstances have more power over your life than you do. You're declaring that other people's words, actions, and behaviors determine your peace, your joy, your success, and your future. That's not power. That's powerlessness dressed up as justified anger. Real power, the kind of power that changes lives, builds empires, saves marriages, and creates legacies, comes from mastering your ability to choose your response. It comes from understanding that between what happens to you and how you act, there exists a sacred space. In that space lives your freedom. Think about the most powerful people you know, not the ones who shout the loudest or throw the biggest tantrums. I'm talking about the ones who command genuine respect, the ones people listen to when they speak, the ones who get things done without creating chaos. What do they all have in common? They don't react, they respond. They've learned to pause. They've learned to think. They've learned to choose when someone insults them. They don't immediately insult back. When someone challenges them, they don't immediately get defensive. When someone disappoints them, they don't immediately lash out. They pause. They consider their options. They choose the response that serves their goals, not their emotions. This isn't about being passive. This isn't about being weak. This isn't about letting people walk all over you. This is about being so secure in your own power that you don't need to prove it through emotional explosions. This is about being so confident in your worth that you don't need to defend it every time someone questions it. The tragedy is that most people confuse emotional reactions with strength. They think that getting angry quickly makes them look powerful. They think that responding immediately makes them look decisive. They think that matching energy for energy makes them look strong. But the opposite is the difference between reacting and responding true. When you react emotionally to every provocation, you look like someone who has no control over themselves. When you respond immediately without thinking, you look impulsive and unreliable. When you match every negative energy that comes your way, you look like a puppet dancing to everyone else's tune. True strength is demonstrated in restraint. True power is shown in the ability to remain calm when everything around you is chaos. True leadership is displayed when you can think clearly while others are losing their minds. Marcus learned this lesson the hard way, but you don't have to. You can learn it right now in this moment
before it costs you your next opportunity, your next relationship, your next chance at success. The power of not reacting isn't just about avoiding negative consequences. It's about positioning yourself to receive positive outcomes that would be impossible if you were constantly reacting to every stimulus in your environment. When you master your reactions, people start to trust you with bigger opportunities because they know you won't fall apart under pressure. When you master your reactions, your relationships become deeper and more meaningful because people feel safe being honest with you. When you master your reactions, your decision-making improves dramatically because you're thinking clearly instead of thinking emotionally. But here's the most important part. When you master your reactions, you reclaim your personal power. You stop being a victim of circumstances and start being the architect of your responses. You stop letting other people's behavior determine your mood and start choosing your emotional state consciously. This is the foundation of all true success. This is the bedrock of all lasting achievement. This is the starting point of all meaningful change. The power of not reacting isn't just a skill, it's a way of life. And once you understand how it works, once you begin to practice it consistently, you'll wonder how you ever lived any other way. Now, let me tell you exactly what happens inside your brain when someone pushes your buttons. Scientists have discovered something remarkable about how we process challenging situations when something threatens us. Whether it's an insult, a criticism, or just an unexpected problem, a tiny part of our brain called the amygdala fires off signals faster than you can blink. This ancient part of your brain doesn't think, it doesn't reason, it doesn't consider consequences, it just reacts. In milliseconds, it floods your system with chemicals designed to help you fight or run away. Your heart rate spikes, your muscles tense, your thinking becomes narrow and focused on the threat. This system served our ancestors well when they faced wild animals. But in today's world, the same system treats a critical email from your boss, why most people live as prisoners to their reactions, the same way it would treat a charging lion. It treats your teenager's disrespectful tone the same way it would treat a physical attack. It treats a traffic jam the same way it would treat a life-threatening emergency. The result? Most people spend their days in a constant state of reaction, responding to modern situations with ancient reflexes that are completely inappropriate for the circumstances they're actually facing. But here's what most people don't know. There's another part of your brain called the prefrontal cortex. This is your thinking brain. This is where wisdom lives. This is where you can pause, analyze, and choose your response. The problem is that it takes about 6 seconds for this part of your brain to come online after your amygdala has been triggered. 6 seconds. That's the gap between automatic reaction and conscious response. That's the space where your power lives. Elena Rodriguez discovered this gap the hard way. She was a successful accountant, organized and efficient at work. But at home, she was losing the battle with her 16-year-old daughter, Sophia. Every conversation seemed to turn into a screaming match. Every discussion became a power struggle. One evening, Sophia came home 2 hours past curfew with no explanation and an attitude that could freeze water. Elena felt that familiar fire rising in her chest. Her mouth opened to deliver the lecture she had rehearsed out 100 times in her head. But something made her stop. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was divine intervention. But instead of reacting, Elena did something she had never done before. She counted to 10 slowly. In those 10 seconds, something shifted. Instead of seeing a rebellious teenager who needed to be controlled, she saw a young woman who was struggling with something she couldn't express. Instead of feeling the need to win an argument, she felt the desire to understand her daughter. "Sophia," she said quietly, "you look troubled. What's really going on?" The question caught Sophia completely off guard. She had prepared for battle, not for compassion. Her defensive walls crumbled, and for the first time in months, she told her mother the truth. She was struggling at school. She felt overwhelmed by college pressure. She was scared about her future. That 10-lot pause changed everything. Not just that conversation, but their entire relationship. Elena had discovered the gap, that sacred space between stimulus and response where transformation becomes possible. This gap exists in every challenging situation you'll ever face. When your spouse says something hurtful, there's a gap. When your boss criticizes your work unfairly, there's a gap. When someone cuts you off in traffic, there's a gap. When your plans fall apart unexpectedly, there's a gap. Most people never find this gap because they're moving too fast. They're so eager to defend themselves, to prove their point, to express their feelings, that they skip right over the most powerful moment in any interaction, the moment of choice. But when you learn to find this gap, when you learn to what happens in your brain when someone pushes your buttons? Pause and breathe and think before you speak or act. You tap into a power that most people never access. You move from being reactive to being responsive. You move from being controlled by circumstances to being in control of your choices in that gap. You can ask yourself the most important question: what response will serve me best in this situation? Not what response feels most satisfying in the moment. Not what response proves you're right, but what response moves you closer to your goals, strengthens your relationships, and protects your peace of mind. This is where true power begins. Let me tell you about the real price of living as a prisoner to your reactions. It's not just about having a bad day or saying something you regret. The cost of reactionary living is massive, and most people are paying it without even realizing what they're losing. When you react instead of respond, you're not just damaging that one moment. You're damaging your reputation. Every emotional outburst, every defensive response, every time you lose control becomes part of how people see you. They start to think of you as unpredictable, unreliable, someone who can't handle pressure. Your colleagues stop bringing you the challenging projects because they're afraid you'll explode when things get difficult. Your friends stop sharing their real problems with you because they don't want to deal with your emotional reactions. Your family starts walking on eggshells around you because they never know what will set you off. Robert Martinez learned this lesson in the most painful way possible. He was one of the most skilled cardiac surgeons in the city, with hands that could perform miracles and a mind that could solve the most complex medical puzzles. But Robert had one fatal flaw. He couldn't control his temper when things didn't go according to plan. If a nurse handed him the wrong instrument, he would explode. If the anesthesiologist was running late, he would unleash a verbal assault that left the entire operating room tense and uncomfortable. If a patient's family asked too many questions, he would become condescending and rude. Robert justified his behavior by telling himself that he was demanding excellence, that his reactions were necessary to maintain high standards. But the truth was, his reactions were destroying his effectiveness and his relationships. The final straw came during a complex heart surgery when a young resident made a small mistake. Instead of calmly correcting the error, Robert launched into a tirade that was so vicious and humiliating that the resident froze completely. The surgery that should have taken 4 hours stretched to 7 because the entire team was walking on eggshells, afraid to make any move that might trigger another explosion. The Elena story, the power of the 6-second pause. Patient survived, but barely. The hospital administration had seen enough. Despite his surgical skills, despite his years of experience, despite his previous success, Robert was quietly asked to resign. Sitting in his empty office, packing his belongings, Robert finally understood what his reactions had cost him. Not just his job, but his reputation. Not just his career, but the respect of his colleagues. Not just his position, but his sense of self-worth. Robert's story isn't unique. Every day, talented people lose opportunities because they can't control their reactions. Marriages end not because of big betrayals, but because of small reactions that accumulate over time. Friendships dissolve not because of major disagreements, but because of minor irritations that were handled poorly. Children grow up believing they're not good enough because their parents react to every mistake with anger instead of responding with guidance. Employees quit good jobs not because of the work, but because they can't stand working for reactive bosses who create toxic environments. The cost of reactionary living extends beyond your relationships. It affects your health. When you're constantly reacting to stress, your body stays in fight or flight mode. Your blood pressure rises. Your immune system weakens. Your sleep quality decreases. Your mental clarity diminishes. You start making poor decisions because you're operating from a place of emotional arousal instead of logical thinking. You miss opportunities because you're too busy defending yourself to see new possibilities. You repeat the same patterns over and over because you never pause long enough to learn from your experiences. But the greatest cost of reactionary living is this: you never become the person you were meant to be. You stay trapped in patterns that were probably formed when you were young, reacting to today's challenges with yesterday's wounds, letting your past control your future. Robert eventually learned to master his reactions, but it took losing everything he had worked for to get his attention. Now let me show you what real power looks like. True power doesn't come from controlling other people. That's manipulation. True power doesn't come from controlling circumstances. That's impossible. True power comes from controlling the one thing you actually have complete authority over: your response to what happens to you. When you understand this principle, everything changes. You stop wasting energy trying to make people behave the way you want them to behave. You stop getting frustrated when situations don't unfold according to your plans. You stop feeling like a victim when unexpected challenges arise. Instead, you focus all your energy on the real price of reactionary living thing that will actually make a difference: how you choose to respond. This is what psychologists call having an internal locus of control. People with external locus of control believe that their success, their happiness, and their peace depend on what other people do and what circumstances they encounter. People with internal locus of control understand that their success, their happiness, and their peace depend on the choices they make in response to whatever happens. Nina Thompson understood this better than most people. She was a single mother working 3 jobs to support her 2 young children. She worked at a diner from 5 a.m. to 2 p.m., cleaned offices from 300 p.m. to 8 p.m., and did bookkeeping for small businesses from 9 p.m. until midnight. Every day brought new challenges. Difficult customers at the diner who complained about everything. Demanding bosses at the cleaning company who criticized her work. Business owners who paid their bills late. Putting her family's budget in jeopardy. Most people in Nina's situation would have become bitter, angry, reactive. They would have snapped at rude customers, argued with unreasonable bosses, and stressed themselves sick over things they couldn't control. But Nina had learned something powerful. She couldn't control what people said to her, but she could control how she received it. She couldn't control when her bosses were unreasonable, but she could control whether she took their behavior personally. She couldn't control when clients paid their bills, but she could control how she managed her finances to handle delays. When a customer complained about cold coffee, Nina didn't get defensive. She smiled, apologized, and brought fresh coffee. When a cleaning supervisor criticized her technique, Nina didn't argue. She listened, learned what she could, and ignored the parts that were just someone having a bad day. When a client was late with payment, Nina didn't panic. She had prepared for this possibility and had systems in place to handle it. Nina's secret was simple. She had developed a response system instead of living with a reaction habit. Every challenging situation triggered the same internal process. First, she would pause and breathe deeply. Second, she would ask herself one question. What response will serve my goals best? Third, she would act based on her answer, not based on her emotions. This response system transformed Nina's life. Her calm professionalism at the diner led to bigger tips and eventually a management position. Her positive attitude at the cleaning company resulted in her being assigned the best accounts and eventually starting her own cleaning business. Her steady reliability with bookkeeping clients grew into a full-time accounting practice within 5 years. Nina had gone from struggling to make ends meet to owning 2 successful businesses. But the most remarkable thing wasn't her financial transformation. It was her inner peace. Despite facing more daily stress than Robert Martinez, how a skilled surgeon lost everything most people could handle, Nina maintained a sense of calm and confidence that drew people to her. True power is like that. It's not loud or dramatic. It doesn't announce itself with emotional displays. It's quiet, steady, and unshakable. It comes from knowing that no matter what happens to you, you always have the ability to choose your response. Now that you understand what true power looks like, let me give you the practical tools to develop it in your own life. The power of not reacting isn't something you master overnight. It's a skill that requires daily practice, conscious effort, and patient development. But once you begin to apply these principles, you'll start seeing results immediately. The first technique is what I call the pause technique. When something triggers you, and you know because you'll feel that familiar surge of emotion in your chest, you deliberately stop whatever you are about to say or do. You count to 6. Not 5, not 10, but 6. This gives your prefrontal cortex time to come online and your emotional intensity time to decrease. During those 6 seconds, you breathe deeply, not shallow breathing from your chest, but deep breathing from your belly. This activates your parasympathetic nervous system and helps your body shift from fight or flight mode to thinking mode. The second technique is what I call the question method. Instead of immediately defending yourself or attacking back, you ask a question. Help me understand what you mean by that. What would you like to see happen differently? Can you tell me more about your concern? Questions do something powerful. They force you to listen instead of react, and they often diffuse the other person's negative energy because they feel heard instead of attacked. The third technique is outcome focus. Before you respond to any challenging situation, ask yourself, what outcome do I want from this interaction? Not what outcome would feel most satisfying in the moment, but what outcome would serve your long-term goals and relationships. Let me show you how all of this works together by telling you about James Harrison, a project manager at a construction company who almost lost his job because he couldn't control his reactions to criticism. James had been with the company for 8 years, working his way up from a laborer to managing multi-million-dollar projects. He was skilled, hardworking, and dedicated. But James had one major weakness. He took every criticism as a personal attack and responded accordingly. When clients complained about delays, James would get defensive and start making excuses. When his boss questioned his decisions, James would argue instead of explaining his reasoning. When team members suggested different approaches, James would shut them down because he felt they were questioning his competence. What true power really looks like. This pattern came to a head during the construction of a new shopping center. The client, Mrs. Peterson, was demanding in particular about every detail. She questioned everything from the placement of electrical outlets to the color of the paint. James felt like she was micromanaging him and disrespecting his expertise. The breaking point came during a site meeting when Mrs. Peterson criticized the way the parking lot was being laid out. She said it looked amateur and poorly planned. James felt that familiar fire in his chest. His face flushed red, his hands clenched into fists. But something made him pause. Maybe it was the memory of seeing his colleague Robert lose his medical career. Maybe it was the realization that his own job was hanging in the balance. Maybe it was just exhaustion from constantly fighting battles that didn't need to be fought instead of exploding. James took a deep breath and counted to 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. In those 6 seconds, something shifted. Instead of seeing an enemy attacking him, he saw a client who was nervous about a major investment and wanted reassurance that her project was in good hands. Mrs. Peterson, James said calmly, I can see that you're concerned about the parking layout. Help me understand exactly what you're worried about so I can address it properly. The question caught Mrs. Peterson off guard. She had been prepared for an argument, not a conversation. Her defensive posture softened, and she explained that she was worried the parking spaces were too narrow and would be difficult for elderly customers to navigate. James listened carefully, asked follow-up questions, and then explained the engineering reasons behind the current design. He also offered 2 alternative approaches that could address her concerns without compromising the structural integrity of the project. By the end of the conversation, Mrs. Peterson was apologizing for her harsh words and praising James for his professionalism. The project proceeded. Nina Thompson, from struggling to success through response control, smoothly, finished on time and under budget, and Mrs. Peterson referred 3 new clients to the company. But the real transformation wasn't in that one meeting. It was in how James began approaching every challenging interaction. When his boss questioned his timeline, instead of getting defensive, James would pause, breathe, and ask what specific concerns needed to be addressed. When team members suggested changes, instead of taking it personally, James would focus on the outcome they all wanted to achieve. This shift in approach transformed James' entire career. He became known as someone who could handle difficult clients and complex situations without creating drama. His boss began assigning him the most challenging projects because he knew James wouldn't fall apart under pressure. His team members started bringing him their best ideas because they knew he would listen without getting defensive. Within 2 years, James was promoted to senior project manager. Within 5 years, he became a partner in the company. But the most significant change wasn't professional. It was personal. James' relationships improved dramatically because people felt safe being honest with him. His marriage became stronger because his wife could share concerns without triggering an argument. And his children began coming to him with their problems because they knew he would respond with wisdom instead of react with emotion. The ripple effect of mastering your responses extends far beyond your own life. When you stop reacting emotionally to challenging situations, you give other people permission to do the same. When you respond with wisdom instead of anger, you model a better way of handling conflict. When you choose peace over proving you're right, you create an environment where real solutions can emerge. This is how change happens in families, in organizations, in communities. It doesn't start with trying to change other people. It starts with one person deciding to change how they respond to other people. Your moment of choice is coming. Maybe it'll be later today when someone cuts you off in traffic. Maybe it'll be tomorrow when your boss criticizes your work. Maybe it will be this weekend when your family member says something that normally would trigger you in that moment. You will have a choice. You can react the practical techniques, the pause method and question technique way you've always reacted and get the results you've always gotten. Or you can pause, breathe, and choose a response that serves your goals, protects your relationships, and demonstrates the power that comes from self-control. The power of not reacting isn't just about avoiding negative consequences. It's about creating positive possibilities that wouldn't exist if you were constantly reacting to every stimulus in your environment. It's about becoming the kind of person that others can count on, look up to, and trust with their most important concerns. This power is available to you right now. You don't need anyone's permission to use it. You don't need special training or expensive equipment. You just need the decision to pause
before you react, and the commitment to practice until it becomes natural. Your life is waiting for you to claim this power. Your relationships are waiting for you to demonstrate this wisdom. Your future is waiting for you to make this choice.
The question is not whether you can do this. The question is whether you